Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies workshop. I'm absolutely delighted that we're going to be running this workshop on children and young people, their involvement in assembly work. We've just run a couple of events, one recently on involving future generations and non-human nature, which kind of raises that question about who should be the constituency of an assembly. And I think for many people in this field, there's a real recognition that there are actually existing future generations who are not present in assemblies, children, young people, and also a hesitancy about how to involve that group of people. And so it's my absolute pleasure to work today with Katie Reid. I say work with, I'm actually going to do nothing. I'm just going to watch and enjoy. But we'll be Katie. I will take all the credit, of course. But to work with Katie Reid, who's a very experienced activist with children and young people. And I first came across Katie's work around the Scotland's Climate Assembly. And Scotland was probably the first assembly, large national assembly, that tried to consistently involve young people. And then she took it one step further when she set up the Children and Young People's Assembly for biodiversity in Ireland, which she'll be telling us a little bit about, I'm sure. And that was actually really exciting because it was a parallel assembly. It wasn't just involving children in different ways, but actually creating an assembly with them. And I know, I have a sneaking suspicion that very, very soon she's going to try and actually have an assembly where there aren't parallel assemblies, but we actually have proper intergenerational dialogue. But I don't want to spoil her thunder. That's not the right way of saying it, but I think you know what I mean. It'd be very interesting to hear what she said. So what we did at Knoca is we said to Katie, write us some guidance, create some guidance for us on involving children and young people. And she said, if I'm going to do that, I want to co-create it with children and young people. We said, absolutely fine. And she said, I want to run a workshop with the Knoca community with children and young people. So this is what we've got today. We've got a co-created workshop led by Katie, but involving a cast of not thousands, but if we've got a cast of children and young people involved with her. We've also got a graphic artist, which she'll tell you about. We've also got a video. It's all singing and all dancing today. And on that point, I shall hand over to Katie. It's a real pleasure, Katie, and it's all over to you.
Thank you so much, Graham. And yeah, a kind of all singing, all dancing start is a nice way to begin. And I think it is just lovely to have this opportunity to bring together so many different fields and communities. We have, I can see just also from the chat as well, people here from children's rights and participation background. We have people in deliberative democracy, people who have been running processes with children and young people like citizen assemblies or juries. So it's really nice to finally have an opportunity for all of us wearing these different hats and roles to be in one space and to really hopefully come together and imagine what this can look like in the future, but also reflect on some of the examples that have happened already. So before I just outline how today is going to run, and Graham's already touched upon a few elements of the workshop today, I have a couple of things just to point out and to note. First of all, we do have children and young people on the call today, which is brilliant, and I'm so excited that we have this opportunity for an intergenerational workshop. But just because of that, we ask that people refrain from taking photographs or videos or screenshots throughout the session and just focus on the workshop. But the Knoca team will be taking screenshots. So if you do want to share on social media afterwards, you are more than welcome. But we just ask you to repost the stuff that Knoca is going to be putting out after the workshop. So that's point number one. And secondly, I'm really delighted, as Graham's already mentioned, that we have the wonderful Hazel Hurley, who is a graphic illustrator, and she's going to be doing a live illustration of the workshop today. And I've worked with Hazel over the last few years through the Irish Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. And Hazel really beautifully helped us to tell that story and to capture the journey that we all went on together. And so it's great that she's here to do just the same thing for us all here today. And so the workshop. So to begin, we're going to begin with an example of an assembly that's taken place that has involved children and young people. And this will involve a film. We're going to bring you into what it really looked and felt like for us. We are going to focus on the example of Ireland's Children and Young People's Assembly on biodiversity loss that Graham talked about in the welcome. And then we're going to take you behind the scenes. And Graham called it, we have a cast of us that were involved in this behind the scenes. And we thought, with this interest in exploring how this actually really looks and works in practice, we thought it would be really helpful to bring everyone into a conversation about some of the practical steps that we had to take to make something like that happen, but also in terms of what the impact's been and what the outcome was of the assembly itself. Because of course, when we're thinking of participation of children and young people, we want to make sure that it's meaningful and that it actually serves a legitimate and tangible role in helping them to be part of the climate decision-making processes that are taking place. And so after our kind of initial deep dive into that example, I'm going to present a little bit of the kind of core themes and findings that are coming out of this guide that I've been working on in collaboration with lots of people, many of whom are here today, which is so nice to see. And then we'll hand over to you, and we'll be asking you to kind of help us in this journey of exploring what this can look like in your context, or perhaps you've actually done something like this already, and we can learn from the learnings that you've had or the findings that you experienced on that journey yourself. So yeah, that's our plan for today, and we really hope that everyone can just get stuck in, get involved, and just enjoy being part of this. I think probably the first conversation we've really had around what this can look like and how we can begin to imagine a really intergenerational approach to climate assemblies. So without further ado, we're going to show you our short film of what happened in the Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss in Ireland.
In September 2022, 35 children and young people, aged 7 to 17 from across Ireland, were randomly selected to be members of Ireland's first Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. We are some of the children and young people who were chosen, and we're excited to tell you about what happened next. We spent 2 weekends together, one in beautiful County Wicklow and our second weekend in Killarney National Park in County Kerry. We spent our first weekend learning about biodiversity and the causes of biodiversity loss. We had a lot of fun playing games, getting creative, and spending time outside, exploring a local nature reserve, which we really loved. We spent our second weekend working together to come up with our vision for the future and our calls to action, which we are excited to share with you.
Our Assembly's vision is an Ireland where we are connected to and care for the rights of nature and each other, so that biodiversity is restored and protected, and we live and grow up in healthy, clean, and fair environments.
We also created 6 key messages that we want everyone to know.
We must treat the earth like a member of the family or a close friend.
Future generations must live in a world where there isn't a biodiversity crisis and where children don't have to take action because of the inaction of past generations.
Every decision must take biodiversity into account.
Children and young people must be included in decisions being made about biodiversity.
Biodiversity protection must be a shared responsibility and a global collaborative effort.
We must consume resources in a sustainable, moderate way that neither diminishes the environment, biodiversity, or our rights, well-being, and livelihoods.
We also created 58 calls to action, which fall under 7 key themes.
To provide education for children, young people, and adults that helps them to understand biodiversity loss, the consequences of our actions, and the things that we can do to address this issue.
To put biodiversity and the rights of nature at the heart of decisions that we make.
To create energy and transport systems which limit our impact on the environment and biodiversity.
To limit the impact of things we buy and use on the environment and biodiversity, and support sustainable ways of living.
to restore and rewild environments which support our biodiversity, including urban and rural places, and develop national parks.
To protect our habitats and native species from the impact of invasive species and land use change.
To address biodiversity loss caused by over-exploitation. To make sure places where we grow and gather our food are places where biodiversity can thrive, and the people who work in these places are helped to tackle biodiversity loss.
Minister Malcolm Noonan joined us at the end of our second weekend to receive our calls to action. He promised that our recommendations will inform Ireland's policies on biodiversity loss.
I'm here today to meet with the children and young people who are involved in the Assembly. It was something that at the outset, when the Citizens' Assembly was being developed for biodiversity, I felt it vitally important that young people had a voice, and not just a voice, but a meaningful voice. The UN Charter for the Rights of Children states that we must include the voices of children and young people. That's a fundamental right. But secondly, it must be done in a way that is meaningful. It can't be tokenistic. We can't be ticking boxes and say we have consulted with young people. They need to have their voices included, and the outputs of any work that we do on national policy or local policy must reflect those voices. And I think that's what's being done here today and over the last number of weeks with the Children and Young People's Assembly. And by doing that, we take on board those testimonials and capture exactly the way young people are feeling.
Our final day also gave us all a chance to reflect on and celebrate our time together as an Assembly and share our hopes for the future.
The Assembly was about biodiversity loss and I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun and I made tons of new friends and it was just it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's just so nice. You'll never meet a nicer group of people, honestly. Over 4 days, we're already planning on hanging out outside the Assembly itself, meeting up, people from all around the island, and we just, we just meshed so well.
The event was really just like the best opportunity for young people to gather together and express their views and opinions on biodiversity loss and climate change. And I'm really hoping that Minister Malcolm Noonan will go off with this information and really propose it to the rest of the government, and hopefully we can see some changes in the near future. I really liked coming up with the calls of action. I thought that it felt really like we were doing something and it felt really useful. But I also loved obviously the bits in between, met loads of nice people, made some good friends, and it was just a really good experience overall.
I hope they actually take our ideas into account and make them to law, so it's actually used and not forgotten.
Our Assembly might be over, but really, this is just the beginning.
Next step is, I suppose, we're going to take what we learned and disperse it however we can, whether that's through the media or through school. Just spread our knowledge and educate more people about what we've learned and get more people on board.
The next step is getting listened to. So essentially what we need to do is make sure that we are heard and the young people of the Assembly are actually taken into account, and our ideas are put through and embedded in a policy. So that is essentially the next step, yeah.
Well, for some of you that have been involved in climate assemblies before, some elements of that film may have felt familiar or even recognized something sort of in terms of methodology or in terms of the format, something very similar to what you've experienced before. For those who perhaps haven't, you're on a learning journey with us today, and we're really glad you're here too. So I think what everyone can probably relate to is just the amount of work that goes in behind the scenes to make something like that happen. And so that's what we're going to talk about just now, really what all the components of that assembly, how it all came together. I'm delighted to be joined by several of the people that were involved in this process. So I'd like to welcome everyone here. We have my colleague Valery, Martina, Hazel here with her graphic illustration, And we also are joined by two of the young people that were involved, Oisín, who was one of the Assembly members, and also Niamh, who was one of our young advisors. And we're just going to have a bit of a conversation about what this looks like. As explained in the film, this assembly came about in parallel to the national assembly that was taking place at the same time on biodiversity loss. But this was independent and separate to that process. And so when Dublin University and University College Cork were commissioned by the Minister for Biodiversity, Malcolm Noonan, who we heard in that film, he had set us up on a journey to set up this assembly. And it was essential to all of us in the adult side of the team that we needed to make the design team intergenerational itself, so that children and young people were involved in the design and facilitation of that process. So we put out an open call for children and young people who were already interested and active in issues around biodiversity, nature, children's rights, and other kind of participatory models to get involved and to become part of our team. And I'm so thrilled that Niamh, one of our young advisors, is here. And I wondered, Niamh, if you just maybe want to share with everyone what this experience was like for you and what your role was in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Katie. Hi, everyone. I hope that you're all well. As Katie said, my name is Niamh, and I'm a young advisor for the assembly that happened here in Ireland last year in 2022. So as Katie said there, I was a young advisor, and part of my role there was helping to design and run the assembly. So to delve into that a little bit more, I got to help to decide on the activities that were going to be run in the assembly and also on the formats. My own role as part of the assembly gatherings was as part of the team group centered around climate change, which was my background when I came into this. I was a climate activist, so that's kind of what I know the most about. And I helped to design materials that were actually used in this group. In my opinion, this was absolutely crucial to the process of the assembly, having a young advisory team, because obviously the assembly took a child's rights-based approach, which was very important to incorporate a young advisory team into it, because we need to be including things like that from the start if we wanted to follow through throughout the entire gathering. As Malcolm said in the video, children's rights are not just about ticking a box to say that we've listened. It's not tokenistic. It is actually about saying, yeah, we've done it from the start. Everything that they've said has been taken into account and it's been listened to, and as much of what they've said as is possible has been incorporated right from the start, right from the finish. Also, children know what children need. Having children involved in the design of the assembly helped to pique the assembly members' interest when they came into the assembly gatherings at the weekends. So there wasn't this kind of feeling that things were kind of running slow or people were getting bored. It was fast-paced, it was quick, but it was also fun and it was energetic. It was so vibrant in the room, and that's because the children that were on the Young Advisory team actually knew what they were talking about, and they were saying, well, maybe if we do this, that will help to interest the assembly members and keep it going, rather than just letting it kind of fizzle out in the middle, because I'm sure, as you can imagine yourselves, that really would not be great. Having children helping to facilitate the assembly gatherings helped keep it relatable for the assembly members as well. Because obviously, if it's just adults talking to the assembly members, they're probably going to feel a little bit like, okay, I'm being told more than I'm being listened to. I'm kind of being told what to do. This isn't necessarily something that I feel I can relate to. But having the young advisors actually helping to run the workshops and being part of the team groups really helped to form connections between the assembly members and the young advisors, and also between the assembly members and the adults. So there was a really great atmosphere there, and like was said in the video, loads of friendships were made. So in short, it really was a children and young people assembly in every sense of the word, and it worked, which is really important to hammer home. Children's ideas were fully listened to and implemented right from the start of the process, and the whole way through, from the gatherings to the very end when we submitted our final report, everything that we said was listened to. It went off without a hitch, but it does take the right adults to do that. Like, an open mind needs to be kept, basically. It's not about adults overriding the opinions of children and young people in favor of their own. It's actually saying, okay, this is for children and young people, so we need to involve them from the start, and we also need to listen to everything that they have to say if we really want it to be meaningful and impactful.
Well, I think we could probably just wrap up the workshop there, Niamh. Like ever, I've just always so blown away by your insights, and I think you and the other young advisors brought so much just joy and energy and creativity into the theme, and the assembly just would not have looked the way it did, or would not have been experienced the way it was experienced had it not been for you all. So thank you again for your role and your ongoing role. You know, the assembly happened a couple of years ago now, almost a year and a half ago. But as a lot of the assembly members remind us, it isn't over. There's a lot still happening, and we'll come back to talk a little bit about that at the end. So you're not over yet, Niamh. I'll come back to you in a moment. So one of the big tasks that the young advisors and us adults, if you like, in the project team had to work on was the recruitment of the assembly members. And models of applying a kind of sortition style or lottery style approach to random selection of children and young people is challenging compared to, say, the adult population. And so we did have to come up against some interesting barriers to that. And we're going to ask Valery, who played a really lead role in navigating some of those barriers, to how we went about the process of recruitment. And perhaps you could share some of the learnings from that journey together.
Yes, thanks so much, Katie, and hi everyone. My name is Valery, and it's always a pleasure to see everyone from the assembly. It's like a never-ending family, and like Katie said, one of the big points in the beginning of the assembly was about recruitment. And I mean, I can say a lot about it because it is a big chunk of the first part before even we gather, but I'm going to try to keep it concise and very much happy to answer any question afterwards. But in terms of recruitment, we're trying to stay as close as possible to the good practice of citizen assemblies. Which meant that we wanted to do a stratified random sample of children and young people to basically participate. So of course, children and young people, we don't have a vote like the voting register to use as we will use for adults. So we had to come up with a different strategy on that. And schools tend to be the easiest and the closest that we can get in terms of actively being able to get to children and young people. However, and this is where the role of young advisors were very crucial. So, for example, in our process, the young advisors were very clear that as we're reaching out to schools, they wanted to make sure that schools didn't think that we were asking them to send the best and the brightest because they were representing schools, but that we were very much actively looking for every young person between the age of 7 to 17 to be able to attend this assembly. So it was nothing to do with the school's quality. It was nothing about representing the school. It was really about the children and young people themselves. So some of the things that we did to make sure that that advice from the young advisors were reflected was to make it clear in the invitation that we sent to the schools. And we followed up with phone calls. I wish we had a lot of times, and this is where the learning comes in a little bit, that schools are great, but there is also the learning that we got is with a lot of time, you could actually go down in the school and make sure that children and young people just have like a tablet where everyone is signing up between those ages. We didn't have that luxury because we were under time pressure. So we had to rely on the schools to do the heavy lifting of announcing it in assemblies and making sure that that they receive. But we also, apart from schools, we're very much also aware that children and young people, not all children and young people engage or see schools as a place of inspiration or less strict. So we thought about targeted approach, especially for inclusion purposes. And this targeted approach was also used for the children conferences in Iceland, where we purposely went looking, talking to different organizations that work with minority groups, children with physical disability, also children that do not go to school, but that are homeschooled. So we reached out to like the traveler community and all of these different groups to make sure that children from those particular group can also feel empowered with trusted bodies to encourage them to participate. And of course, we also use social media. I don't know, Katie, if you want to show the slides, so just to give you a little bit of a picture. So we receive, all in all, with these three medium, we received about 510 expression of interest, to which with the random stratified sample, we were able to select 35 assembly members. And these are the stratified criteria that we use. And this is a little bit of numbers. I can say a little bit more, but I'm going to stop here. And hopefully, if there's any other questions, I can follow up. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Valery. It's really, it's interesting to journey or to go all the way back to that point in the process, because at that point we really didn't know what was going to happen with the assembly. You know, of course you can plan as much as you like, and you can design all the different elements and kind of anticipate what might happen, but you really don't know how it's going to play out until you get there. And by the very nature of random selection, we actually had no idea if this would even work. And I think Niamh alluded to the fact that, you know, it spoke volumes just how much the co-facilitation between young people, children and adults helped to create this really welcoming and supportive and inclusive space for everyone when we got there, that actually it became kind of a really special experience for everyone. And so I'm really thrilled that we have Oisín here, who is one of our assembly members. And yes, Oisín, I think everyone would be really interested to hear what it was like for you from the moment you received the letter to say that you had been selected to what you're up to now. Let's hear a little bit about what it's been like for you.
So hi everyone, I'm Oisín, and as Katie said, I was an assembly member in the Ireland Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. And as part of the assembly, me and the other assembly members, the final goal was just to get calls to action for us to propose to the government. But there was a lot more to it than just really just getting the end result. On the first weekend, we spent the whole weekend getting to know each other and learning about the importance of biodiversity. And then on the second weekend, we were all split into our theme groups, and I was in the climate change group with Niamh. So we were focusing on the main issue of climate change and how it relates to biodiversity. But there were also 4 others, including invasive species and overexploitation. Once we'd finished our theme group sessions, we all, at the end of the last day, we all went off and we all wrote down our calls to action on the big poster boards, and we came up with 58 in all, which is amazing. So many of them. And so since there were so many, we split them all into 7 categories so they'd be easier to understand. And the main one that really stood out to me was education, because that's the heart of how to get people to know about biodiversity and know it's an issue. And then at the last day, it was just really emotional because we'd all made really close friendships because we were all people who were passionate about the same thing. And then after the project, it really didn't end because this November, me, Niamh, and a few other assembly members and young advisors brought our things up to the Oireachtas Committee, the government in Dublin, and we presented them all to the ministers up there just to make sure. So we actually got to bring it to government, which was an amazing opportunity, something you wouldn't get to do elsewhere. And so that was just a great day then. And then we got to watch the doll and stuff as well, so that was great. And we've also designed a bunch of resources which will be used by primary and secondary schools as part of a tribe project, The primary school one, we're using fun-based activities so that they'll understand it easier. And for secondary, we have more advanced PowerPoints and questionnaires. So the main message, and none of it would be possible without our adult facilitators and student advisors who were just a great help as part of the assembly. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Oisín. And yeah, I mean, had the real privilege of being there in the committee room when you were giving evidence just a couple of months ago, and Niamh was there too. And honestly, myself and Jeremy Torney, who was also a core part of the team, were just completely blown away by all of you just managing to basically handle a 2-hour committee evidence session, which is not something that many adults ever get the chance or probably want to have to do. And you both just did a remarkable job, being able to engage with very different politicians with very different agendas, and you were really amazing at being able to amplify your calls to action, and also the importance of children and young people's participation in these spaces, and reminding them that you do have a right to be taken seriously and to be part of this conversation. So I just wanted, to say that was just a truly amazing moment to watch, and such credit to all the work that you've put in. But I also want to pick up on something else you touched upon, which was this educational element. And it's pretty interesting because your call to action around education is also very similar to something that came out of Scotland's Climate Assembly and the process that children went through there. They also felt that, one of the big revelations of being an assembly member was they realized we're not learning this stuff in school. Like, why is this not accessible to all children? And so one of their big kind of themes, if you like, was also about education. And so I'm wondering a little bit about how the learning journey that you went on, because in a citizens assembly or a climate assembly, there's usually those three phases. There's the learning phase, there's the deliberation phase, and then there's also the kind of developing of recommendations or calls to action. And so if we kind of go back to that learning phase, I think all of us really kind of worked together to put a lot of thought into how that evidence would be presented and how to do it in, as you say, Oisín, like fun and creative and interesting ways. And we had to bring in lots of experts to help bring the content and the themes to life. And so I'm going to hand over to Martina, maybe who's one of our biodiversity experts. Martina O'Brien works for Dunleary as a Dunleary County Council as a biodiversity officer, and she was brought in to help facilitate the knowledge and learning exchange with children. So Martina, I don't know if you want to just reflect a little bit about your journey in this process and what ways the children were supported to learn about the issues that were covered at the assembly.
Thanks, Katie. So I think just reflecting back on the weekends that we spent with the young people, I think what kind of came to mind as one of the most important things for supporting learning was actually the safe space that was created for the children and young people. And I think, that was a lot of that was done in advance of any kind of learning. And I think that makes sense that we needed to create an environment, or well, the assembly members and yourselves and the young advisors needed to create an environment that allowed learning actually to happen. So I think that was done through a number of different ways. Like, I think one of them was check-ins with animal cards. So we had like a load of animal cards laid out in front of us, lions, pandas, penguins, and just those check-ins to touch base each day on and after each session to see how we were all feeling and how we were all doing. We had time outside, we had check-ins with family groups, so children of the same age coming back together. We had mascots, different teddies that were associated with each group, and we had play and movement. And I think all of those things really created an environment for learning. And I think anyone involved in learning knows that that's you don't get any learning until you have that kind of safe space that's inclusive and encouraging and fun. But beyond that, then there was some work done on thinking about how to present this information. It's a huge area, it's a hugely complex area, biodiversity loss, and that's where we got the idea to break into thematic groups, and that's based on scientific evidence of the drivers of biodiversity loss. So those 5 key drivers of climate change, habitat loss, overexploitation, pollution, and invasive species. And so my background is invasive species, so I was part of that thematic group. And how we decided to present the information was to actually bring in specimen of invasive species, and I had that opportunity being within that thematic group to do that. But I think the overall kind of aim was to have a light touch, so to present the information, but to allow the children to get involved in the learning and to stand back. So we had sessions where we talked about the facts of invasive species, and we showed zebra mussels, an Asian clam, an Asian hornet, and then they were able to create posters and present back to us that information and to talk through kind of potential solutions for addressing invasive species. And then on the second weekend, we looked at this fictitious town of Ballyjas, where we were kind of introducing the idea of different perspectives, and when we encounter environmental problems, say in the development of a town and housing, how we can address them and how it kind of affects different types of people, so farmers and landowners and county council officers, and so the children were able to kind of see those different perspectives, and then from all of that we were able to kind of draw up calls to action. So we got together after all of these sessions and we talked about how we might address all of the problems that we talked about over the last 2 weekends, and that was really, again, through structured questioning on how can we go about this? What is the vision? What do we see Ireland looking like in 2050, 100 years from now, and that. So yeah, that was kind of the overview of the 2 weekends. There's so much more, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Martina. And I think that also nicely links to what's happening as this conversation unfolds. And I'm sure many of you are watching Hazel behind the scenes doodling away. And Hazel really helped us to capture the themes and ideas that were coming out of the Assembly through 2 phenomenal murals that were co-created with children and young people. And so Hazel, I don't know if you would mind just popping down your pen for a couple of moments, coming out from behind the screen, and just maybe reflecting a little bit on the role of visual aids and visuals within the Assembly, because that kind of visual identity became really, really important as the Assembly progressed.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Katie. So yeah, hello, I have a face as well. Yeah, the visual identity, I suppose when I was asked to work on this project, I was so delighted to be involved because I'd heard about it and I was so glad to get the call from Valery. But the visual identity was already really strong in what Katie had developed, and then it was carried through by the graphic designer. So it was just a lovely kind of visual color scheme and everything to work with. And I suppose I was brought in because the young people wanted to do a mural as a space to reflect and, you know, on kind of the learnings and the experiences they were having, and then also as a space maybe develop their calls to action. So as it was we were doing the Assembly over 2 weekends, we would be moving, so a paper mural is what we decided on, and it just emerged over the 2 weekends as a beautiful piece, kind of co-created with everyone's different styles involved. And then yeah, I suppose there was that, and then in the second weekend then I did what I kind of do. My main kind of job is graphic recording. So when we were doing that activity that Martina mentioned, the Ballyjas, I got to create a visual representation of the different perspectives on this town of Ballyjas. And then I suppose when the minister visited us, I got to capture his reflections and, you know, the impact that you know, what had been his idea, this assembly, the impact it had on him, and he was quite emotional, so I got to draw a little teardrop on his face. And I suppose, yeah, my work reflected, you know, the beautiful artwork that the children were creating, you know, in their different different thematic groups. So, and they got involved by, you know, coloring and everything, so it was beautiful. You know, both pieces were lovely pieces of co-creation. And so and then it was really special that we were able to bring those along with a poster that I had designed on the calls to action. We were able to bring these into the Adults Assembly, and in a way, you know, that was so magical and, you know, important to bring I suppose what you saw in the video there, the color, the creativity, the fun, you know, the children's voice, you know, in the space we created. We were able to kind of take over the Adults Assembly, which was a room full of, you know, just like people sitting around big circular tables, and we were able to take over that for, you know, half a day and, you know, bring the child's voice in there through the use of the visuals. So yeah, it was really special for me to be involved, and I'll go back to drawing now.
Thanks so much, Hazel. And yeah, it really does just bring so much color and life and joy to the whole process. But there are words that I quote of children and young people who have been helping to shape this guidance and who have said that these are the things that really help make it feel like that supportive and safe and joyful space that we all sought to create. And I just noticed there's a few questions coming through in the chat, and please do also take a moment to pop them in the chat there. But it's actually brilliant because we have a question here about the age gap, and that's something that I wanted to just touch upon very briefly. Is this is something that's often asked about this process, but also the process in Scotland, and I know of others that are also running similar processes. It's about the kind of the difference between, say, a 7 and a 17-year-old. How do you bring everyone into that space? And I like Graham's response to this comment. I don't know if people are keeping an eye on the chat. I'm not always great at doing two things at once, but here I can kind of see Graham's responded really, aptly, saying like, well, this is also an issue for standard adult assemblies. And I think what's really interesting is that this is through the kind of methodological choices that we made consciously, and also through the style of that kind of peer-to-peer, even self-learning that was the approach taken, the process could be adapted. And so the difference between those theme groups that Martina was describing, where they were, mixed age groups focusing on a different driver of biodiversity, the learning that they would learn in those sessions could then be kind of, pardon the pun, but like cross-pollinated when they went back into their age-specific groups, their family groups. And that would mean that, and I was responsible for the 7 and 8-year-olds. We would come together at the end of the day, and they, in their own way, would share with their peers of a similar age what they'd learned in their different groups. And there was that space for them to go further if they wanted to. Some were really curious about one particular thing and would go off and explore and bring that knowledge back the next weekend. But then those in the older group, for example, Valery had the 16 and 17-year-olds, that was their own space to then go beyond and to explore things further as well in their own age appropriate way, but also in a learning style that really worked for them. So there was perhaps more blurred elements between learning and deliberation, and perhaps we would see in an adult assembly. And sometimes that kind of led into one another. The deliberation was naturally coming out of the learning. But at the same time, there were so many really amazing opportunities to explore how adult assemblies can draw from some of the learnings of this, and how they can also identify that not everyone in that room as an adult will learn in the same ways or necessarily engage in evidence in the same way. So perhaps it's something that can be learned from this type of approach to the assembly. So I just wanted to comment on that question. And this is something that is going to be further explored within the guidance that's being produced. And the second question there, and actually I wonder if I can maybe pose this question to Oisín and to Niamh. This question is from Jazz Hall, and he's asking, was there a moment when it all gelled or switched on for people during the process? And if so, why? Would either of you be interested in answering that question? Maybe like, did it all come together at one point? Something like that.
Yeah, I think it all really came together like towards, it all came together like after the first weekend. The first weekend we were all just getting to know each other, but then afterwards we were all just working so well today. They were all just came together perfectly, and I think we all had similar mindsets, and we were all just thinking the exact same things. So all our calls to action were quite similar. So it was really, we all just thought alike.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if you wanted to add something there, Niamh.
Yeah, I think you could really see it on the Sunday morning of our second assembly weekend, which was the day that we finished up, when we actually presented all of our findings to Malcolm Noonan and to each other. And like Oisín was saying, we had really similar findings. So I think that was kind of where we all saw that children and young people are actually thinking the same here, and they want to see the same things coming out of these citizens' assemblies, and they want the same type of future where everything is so much better than what it is now. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Niamh. There's a couple of more questions that are coming through the chat, which I think in the next part of this, once we've all taken a short break, I'll draw upon when I'm talking about the guidance. But there's one kind of final question that I just want to pose it again to you, Niamh and Oisín. But there are people here in this call that are perhaps interested in running a climate assembly and involving children and young people in some way. And there are also some people that have done it already. So that's just to highlight that we've got a mixed crowd. But I'm wondering, what would your key message or advice be to them if they're stepping out on this journey? Right now, what would your key message be? I don't know if Oisín or Niamh wants to go first.
Yeah, I might jump in if that's okay with Oisín. Yeah, okay. So like when we're talking about things like this, I mentioned earlier that like a child's rights-based approach was taken. That's really, really important to have as a basis for any assembly like this. And in particular, there are 3 rights that kind of need to be taken into account. These are the right to participate, the right for children and young people's opinions and voice to be given due weight and to be properly heard. And of course, for assemblies like this, the right to a clean and healthy environment. Like, it's really, really important that if we're talking about children's rights, it's carried through start to finish. Again, like I was saying earlier, not just about ticking a box, not tokenistic, actually about this is about what they're thinking and this is about what they need. This is about what they want to see happening in their future. That's really important to have from the start right down to the end, down to the very last minute of it. There's also like things like we had a nature walk during one of our assembly weekends, which everyone absolutely loved. And it helped to link all up in kind of a visual and a tactile sense, because like it's great to talk about nature, but also getting out in it, like that brings the beauty of it to life. And again, like forming those connections, like we were saying earlier, making it more relatable. That's really important as well if we want these things to work. And then there's things like, you know, the stigma that's attached, excuse me, to listening to the voice of children and young people. Some adults do think that we don't necessarily know what we're talking about because we're young and we don't understand these issues in depth, but we do. And assemblies like this are constantly proving it between Ireland and Scotland. We do know about these things. We're worried about them. And not only that, we have the right to talk about that and to be included in decisions that are being made about these things. So like we have to be given the space to expose our knowledge of these issues, but also our vulnerability in relation to these issues, like our anxiety and our fears. And that has to be done somewhere that we feel safe. So listening is key for that to happen. It also must be remembered that assemblies are being run like this for the children, for their future, not for adults to kind of be taking over and putting their opinions in first and favoring what they think over what children and young people think. No, it's us that are going to be here in 50, 60 years time, still living with the effects of whatever happens today, whatever biodiversity is lost today, or whatever decisions are brought in today. So we have an automatic say, a right to a say at least, in what those decisions will be, in what we actually have to live with and face when we're older.
Thank you so much, Niamh. Oisín, I don't know if you'd like to add something there as well.
Yeah, I think it's just really when there's an assembly involved with children, all the people need to feel safe and comfortable sharing their ideas. So I think like we had a pre-assembly call on the week before, and that was just a great way to get to know people in the assembly. So then when you actually arrive on site at the assembly, you feel comfortable in all sharing your ideas with them. And also, as you said, you need to actually bring people out into the issue that you're discussing. Like we were discussing biodiversity, so we went out into nature a lot, and if you're just stuck in a room, just sharing ideas, it's basically just school, and children will lose interest, they'll get bored. So it's just important to mix it up a bit, I suppose, and just have some fun incorporated into the design.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, I think that's going to have left everybody feeling really inspired and with lots of ideas going around. And I see there's still a few questions in the chat, so I'll make sure to weave in some reflections to those that are sending.
So for this next part of the workshop, I'm going to walk you through the draft guidance that I've been developing together with a wonderful group of people that have been involved in delivering and designing or participating in climate assemblies with children and young people. And this guidance is very much been kind of underway over the last few months, and I've been having conversations with lots of different people that have been involved, and it really, it's a springboard, it's a starting point for all of us that are interested in this conversation. And so what I'll do is I'll just walk you through how the guide's taking shape, and then we're going to break out into rooms so that you can discuss some of the kind of questions that myself and other people interested in this space have already been trying to unpack, and we would love to bring you into this conversation too. So my screen's brilliant. So as we've kind of already outlined in the conversation that we've just been listening into, this guide ultimately aims to put a child rights-based approach at its heart. And there's a really important reason for that. And that's the big question, the why. Essentially, as Niamh actually put so well just in our final part of the conversation, children have the right to have their voices heard in decisions that are being made about matters that affect them, and for those voices to be taken seriously, and to ensure that children and young people can also have their other rights realized. And these are the rights that are outlined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And just last year, something really exciting for children happened. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, for the first time, enshrined children's rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment within what's called its General Comment number 26. And in this authoritative guidance for all state parties, and that is almost every single country in the world, apart from the United States of America, but all of these governments have signed up to say, yes, that we will uphold children's rights. And so now that this is also made clear that children have the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, this now means that children have to be included in decisions that are being made about the environment and climate change and all of the interrelated crises that we are facing and that our planet is facing. And so with that in mind, and with that in context, it's absolutely imperative that children and young people are involved in climate assemblies as and when they're taking place. And that from the outset, when someone is thinking about commissioning a climate assembly or has been tasked with designing and facilitating, that they have this in the back of their mind and they're actively thinking of ways to involve children and young people in some way. And so that's kind of the initial standpoint where this begins from. But it also speaks to the fact that so many children and young people themselves are wanting to be part of the conversation, and there are just there is continuing to be ongoing barriers for them to access spaces where they can meaningfully have their say. What this guide then is not. This guide is a short piece of guidance. It is not a 100 or 200-page manual on how to run a climate assembly with children and young people. It seeks to build upon the existing guidance and manual that's already out there about running a similar process with adults, but outlining the kind of specific considerations to be mindful of and how this could be applied and reimagined to involve children and young people. And sorry, there seems to be a slight delay with my slides, but there we go. And then it's also really important at this point just to highlight, and these are some of the conversations and questions that have been coming up in the chat, that it also is we have to be quite careful about language when we're talking about children and young people's involvement in decision making. And that's because in this case, and particularly with regards to climate assemblies, we have slightly unpacked definitions at play. So one of the core things that we do need to define is what we mean when we say children and young people. And so this guidance is focusing particularly and specifically on children and young people aged 0 to 17 or under 18 as defined as children by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's because when we think of citizens' assemblies, including those about the climate emergency, as Valery pointed out, a lot of these spaces are the eligibility for participating in an adults assembly is one that is based on age, so or the electoral system. So with so many children and young people not having the right to vote, they are automatically excluded from being involved in what I'm kind of defining as an adults assembly space. So therefore, this guide looks at those who are not currently eligible in terms of that younger age bracket. But it's also because there are particular safeguarding and practical considerations for involving under 18s as well that we do need to be mindful of when involving children and young people. And so this guide focuses on that age bracket. But there are, of course, examples of youth assemblies that have taken place. And there's even really exciting hopes that a youth assembly with at a transnational level is going to be taking place in Europe in the near future. So there are conversations about youth assemblies as well, but it's really important that we don't muddy the water, because often the youth assembly can refer to an older age range, which actually kind of crosses over into adulthood, if you like, or that over 18 bracket. In some contexts, youth even means up to 35, even 40 years of age. So it's just to be clear that this guidance is focusing on those under the age of 18 years of age. And then that kind of links to that other definition about a citizens' assembly. When we're thinking of assemblies and children and young people, there's also lots of different meanings. An assembly can be a gathering at school where children and young people are coming together in the morning to hear about the updates and news from the head teacher or other people at school. But an assembly can also be something where children aren't randomly selected to participate. It can be something where children are applying to participate or are opting into something through a kind of recruitment or nomination style approach. So it's just to highlight that this particular guidance is focusing on the Citizens Assembly style model of random selection of children and young people, and one that seeks to complement the structure that's there for, by and large, the adult population at present. And then finally, so how this guide was created. So it is really bringing together lots of different learnings and insights from those of us that have been doing this over the last 2 years. And of course, it's not exclusive of all of the examples, because I've been doing my best to try and get as many people that I know of have been involved in these assemblies already on board. But of course, there will be those that I don't know of, and also those that are happening that perhaps, just haven't had the chance to have a chat yet. So this is also not the end guidance. This is very much a starting point, and I'm sure that I'm hoping beyond this, it will inform others to be able to take this forward within their context, and hopefully spark and inspire lots of new models to come out of it. The guide does, however, focus on 4 case studies, and it does use these as a sort of starting point for thinking about the different ways that people have approached this question. One is the 2 national examples that I was involved in both, so Scotland's Climate Assembly and the Children's Parliament that took place in 2020. There's the example that we heard from just before in Ireland with the Children and Young People's Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. And then we have 2 wonderful community examples, and I was really, really touched and excited to hear about these examples that have been taking place in England and Wales, which has seen community assemblies with like the adult population integrate in the voices of children and young people in 2 different ways. So this case study also draws upon these models and just really shows that that it can be done on very different levels, and that there's so much scope to explore and experiment in this area, which is really exciting. And one of the questions in the chat that I'm really glad was raised is something I've been thinking a lot about, and I know others have too. It's around, so what can this really look like? And I think listening to what's already been done, but also kind of, I guess, imagining what could be done in the future. There's at present, I guess, a kind of spectrum of options, a menu of options, if you like, of how this could work. And I guess the first one to outline is that it would be like a separate process in which a citizens' assembly for children and young people is created, a bit like what we did in Ireland, but where there's no connection to a process with adults. So it's a standalone process. It's for children and young people, with children and young people, and it serves that purpose where it stands alone as its own assembly. The second way that we can look at this is where there are these kind of parallel processes that we've also been talking a little bit about already, where children and young people participate in their own assembly designed with and for them, and then they share their recommendations with a parallel adults assembly taking place at the same time as sort of stakeholders. They would almost be presenting their recommendations and ideas as evidence to the adults for their consideration. And I would argue, and I think this is really important, that it would be reciprocated, so that the adults assembly would be presenting their ideas and their evidence back to the children, so that there could be that kind of connectivity between the 2. One step further, and I think everyone knows what's coming at the end, and I think there's already been some signposting in the chat of where the end's coming, but basically this would be integrated parallel processes where we have very strong intergenerational learning and deliberation woven throughout. So they would be separate, but that instead of there being a kind of stakeholder presentation element, that actually the deliberation would be really weaving these different generations together as part of the process. And then as far as I'm aware, this has not happened. I'm very keen to explore and see what this might look like. And I know there's some comments in the chat that are equally interested, but there would to have a fully intergenerational assembly. And so this would be where children, young people, and adults are recruited to form one assembly, and that together they would experience the learning, deliberation, and recommendation forming from the get-go, and that this would obviously serve to strengthen that kind of intergenerational approach to deliberation, which could, in theory, really improve the legitimacy and accountability of the outcomes all around as well. So that's kind of, a menu of options. Of course, there are definitely other ways to do this as well. But from where we are right now, this does seem to be like some of the possible pathways that can be explored. And what difference can it make? I'm not going to go too much into this because we've already had the opportunity to hear from so many of the people that were involved in, for example, one case study, but I do think it's really important just to highlight some of the key reasons why this why this is so exciting and what difference it can make. So first of all, like the examples that we've heard from already, but also comparing and contrasting with others that have happened, we've seen that, you know, there's such an increased understanding of and engagement in climate action and deliberation, as well as an understanding of children's rights within or amongst children and young people themselves. And that's the participating children and young people. But it's phenomenal to see the ripple effect that it has amongst their peers, their friends, their classmates, their siblings, and then that extends to their parents and carers and community members. There's so many extra people that get involved when you're involving children and young people. And that can be on a very practical level. Often to communicate with children and young people and to coordinate, it requires going through parents and carers or schools. So you kind of naturally bring in and weave in different layers of investment in the process, just by the very nature of involving children and young people in the first place. And that can have really exciting impacts on the calls to action being taken seriously and implemented in any given context. Oh, here we go. Oh no, going backwards. As we've heard already, both in the film and from some of the comments that have been shared this morning, there's something really magical happens in these spaces. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I've felt it, and I know lots of others have too. There's a huge, there's a creation of new friendships, intergenerational connection, and a strengthened sense of collective action. People coming together, imagining new futures, imagining new ways of working together. I really loved when I was hearing about the example that happened in Bude, that the adults that had started to work out, okay, so if the young people are wanting to have school gardens, how are they going to manage that over the summer holidays? Could we step in and could we help and actually be responsible for making that come to life in the summer and making sure that it works, you know? So people start to like come together and think of different solutions in new ways, which is really exciting. And I think with that comes, you know, adults are reminded of their responsibilities to younger and future generations, and at the same time children simultaneously feel listened to, valued, and taken seriously. We then, you know, in turn, this can really improve the outcome of recommendations. But we've seen in examples where children have had the chance to share their ideas with adults in two different or multiple different assembly situations. What we've seen is that adults have been both inspired and impressed by children's own ideas and initiatives, and have actually sought to strengthen their own recommendations to be bolder and to actually align better with what children and young people themselves are calling for. And so there is a real, you know, area to explore here, and like how can children and young people's participation in climate assemblies actually improve some of the outcomes of the recommendations, which is really exciting. And in, you know, thinking really big, can this also just be a stepping stone into strengthening the future of democracy and how we're actually realizing children's rights? If we're thinking about how to do democracy, how do we create more deliberative structures within our societies? One of the best places to start is with how we bring these values and these ideals into childhood, how we foster an interest in respectful, empathetic, engaging learning and dialogue within schools. And so if we can really bring these models into the classroom, into homes and communities, does this actually set us up really nicely for what deliberation will look like in many years to come? And I think what we're seeing is that this in turn also helps to realize children's rights, and that it supports a kind of sustained commitment to embedding children's participation within all areas of governance. And you can probably hear it in my voice. I think it's a really exciting time to be exploring and innovating what this can really look like. But there are some key, that's a terrible word, not but, there are key considerations when working with children and young people that we need to be thinking about. And so here is just a very brief summary of some of the key things to have come out in the conversations that I've been having with people that have been doing this already. And firstly, I just want to highlight, so the key thing about this is that you don't have to go alone. There are lots of us that have been doing children's participation or youth work, pedagogical learning. There's lots of different organizations that are really experienced in working with children and young people. And the best way to go is to partner up, is to work with people that really have those relationships, those skills and experience of working with children and young people in a participatory, creative way. And most importantly, to involve children and young people in the design. And I think that really came out clearly in the discussion earlier about what value and just general amazingness children and young people bring to a process when brought in from the very beginning. And so, yeah, intergenerational partnerships, the way to go. Fun and creativity. These are two words that children and young people themselves say time and time again when we say, what is going to make an assembly work, or what was the best bit of an assembly? These are the two words that are so commonly used. And it's really important that when we think about fun and creativity, that this extends to, well, it's both methodology, so how we create that space that is a really positive learning environment, but also in terms of how children can express themselves, and that kind of, accepting that children's voices, that voice doesn't have to mean the written word. It can be drawing, it can be drama. There's so many different ways of expressing ourselves. And so it's really important to think about what that means and what that looks like. The next one is about well-being, and this is really important when we're working around the area of the climate crisis, which we know can be a really anxiety-inducing topic for many children and young people, but also a really frustrating one where many children and young people feel that they're not being listened to, or that there's a lack of hope in what can come out of these discussions. So it's really important that these assemblies are really mindful of how evidence is presented in a way that is, of course, not glossing over the reality, but that is very hopeful and solutions focused. And I love this quote here that says, even though the assembly dealt with a serious topic, keeping the sessions light and fun worked well. Dividing the time for learning, talking and playing, and using different spaces, inside and outside, made it feel easy and fun. And I think that really speaks volumes to just how having a child right space approach, which puts a real emphasis on making it a safe and empowering space for children at all times, is really key. The next point is around inclusivity and accessibility. And this is one of the questions that we were talking about earlier about age of participants. How do we set the age of participants, and what is the lower age range? But also, how do we ensure that it's also an inclusive and accessible space to children with diverse learning needs, diverse abilities, diverse backgrounds? And so one thing just to flag as well is that there's also the big question about how do we include children that aren't assembly members? And I think there's really interesting opportunities to explore what other processes of engaging children can be, especially given citizens' assemblies are a relatively unknown concept when it comes to working with children and young people. So that's something that has definitely come out of all of the different assemblies that we've been working on. And then kind of rattle through the last couple. So one is, of course, time. And now anyone that runs big participatory processes will know that there's never enough time. And I don't know how that happens. Even if you plan with the most lead-in time, it will never be enough. But anyway, this is especially important when working with children and young people. And it's also challenging given that children and young people have a particular calendar often determined by the school year. And so it's just to be really mindful of things like school holidays, exam periods, school daytimes, even important holidays. Like we've worked really hard to avoid Halloween in Ireland, knowing that we probably wouldn't have any children coming. So it's just important to think about these things that can also impact upon participatory structures. And then also time extends to thinking about the downtime as well as the do time. It's brilliant having a jam-packed agenda with lots of activities, but it's really important to carve out time for just connecting and just chatting and spending time together. And that kind of free open play and space is just as important as when the assembly members are getting down to the evidence or the deliberation. And then finally, it's also important when thinking about feedback when it comes to time. And this is actually something I've connected with Des Holt today, which has been really nice. And we both kind of share a feeling around one of the big challenges about participation with children is the fact that when the children need to receive timely feedback, but we have a bit of an issue when decision-making processes are slow and children and young people grow up really fast. And so how we keep those cycles of communication can be really challenging, but it's not impossible. And I think, we had a one-year reunion where we brought everyone back together to share the outcomes of the assembly back in person with the children and young people. There are ways to get creative to make it happen, but there does have to be attention given to that, because it's not as straightforward as it is relying upon children and young people to, I don't know, follow the news or something. And then finally, that really does lead on to that last bit. Oh no, I've missed that space. I'm not going to dwell on space. I think it's been said enough, and that quote probably says it all. Nature and beautiful surroundings matter. And it's really important that when you're thinking about space, if we're going to be talking about the climate emergency, that we're out and about in nature, we're really getting to know our environment and really feeling that connection with the space. So I think that one is a given. But then finally, feedback and follow-up. So thinking about how you will communicate after the assembly is really important, but also how members can be supported after the assembly to either pursue their own action or to speak out on different spaces, to amplify their calls to action to different audiences. And having kind of signposts and pathways for the assembly members to continue that action is really, really important. And also recognizing that the relationships that have been built are really, really important, and just being able to sustain those in a way that is meaningful is something to think about too. And that is just something that this guidance really wants to do. It wants to signpost you to other examples so that you can think about these questions in your own time and space. And that hopefully when you're thinking about some of these issues in your own context, that you can, learn from what's been happening, but of course adapt and create something new as well. There's plenty of room for innovating and doing things a little bit differently. So I hope that this guidance will enable you to go off and do that, and perhaps create new communities of practice and sharing as well, which would be magic. So the questions here are really just an opportunity for you to reflect on processes that you might have been involved in already, or to think ahead to the future and what might come. If anyone would like to share some reflections on your discussion in the room, we'd love to hear from you. We have a few minutes, just to spark some ideas that have come out of the breakout rooms. If anyone would like to get the ball rolling. Yes, not all groups would have children and young people. And actually, that's something that I did want to point out early on, and just is something that slipped my mind. But the challenge of running a webinar at 2 till 4 UK time is that it does coincide with school, and even if it's later, it's coinciding with children and young people doing more interesting things. So it's unfortunately this wasn't going to be the most child and youth friendly space. I'm really grateful that we do have some of the assembly members and young advisors from Ireland, and also others that have been involved in assemblies. For example, I saw that Amelia was here, and she was involved in the Millennium Kids Assembly in Australia, which is brilliant. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. So I know that there are a few, but not too many. But actually, I think as adults, we also have a responsibility to show up for children and young people, and as allies, and to be reflecting on our own work as well. So I encourage you to have these conversations with children and young people that you might come up against in your life and be working with, or at home in your community. But it is something that this conversation it's important for us adults also to think about. I hate to break it to you, Graham, but do you know what? I'm not even going to say that there's more exciting things in a Knoca workshop. You know that I strongly believe that this is the best way to spend your time. But would anyone like to reflect back on some of the conversations had in your breakout rooms? Gosh, it must have been very quiet in there.
You might have to pick on people, Katie.
But that's not very fair. All right. Oh, is that Torsten? Are you raising your hand, Torsten? Oh, David is great. And David was in my breakout rooms. This is going to be good.
Yeah. Okay. I really enjoyed the conversation and found it quite both enlightening and super thorough. Our Jamboard is just about full of Post-its, especially, interestingly enough, the third question on barriers. We identified quite a few, and some were subtle and, not so concrete, and the ideas of like child washing, which I've experienced with the youth programs that I've worked with. It seems like the politicians just wanted to be able to say, we've consulted youth, and then they go on with their process, and didn't seem to really absorb what the youth were saying. And a variety of other such ideas that came through that were subtle and tricky and difficult to work with over time, but to be aware of as we move forward with this. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it.
David, I think that's a really important point. And yeah, I don't know if everyone's had a chance to look at the Jamboard, but it's flourishing. So thank you for all sharing your ideas there. And we can also share around the link afterwards if anyone wants to add additional things. I'm wondering if Oisín or Niamh perhaps want to share something that came out in your breakout room, or Valery. I know that Amelia is also here somewhere. Some of our young people that are here.
Yeah, one of the things to come up here is that there can still be a bit of a prejudice towards adults in assemblies, how we can have, even if they're children based, we could still have like the children would have to leave the room and then the adults would then vote on what they think is worth putting in the final report and stuff like that. One of we come up with.
Yeah. Do you think, to flip it around, adults could be asked to leave the room so children do the voting?
Yeah, it's definitely an option. And then we have mixed as well, where you can have both involved, where you have your adults and children voting side by side.
I think that could look really interesting. Be worth exploring for sure. Thanks, Oisín. Who else? Who else can I pick? I don't like picking up people. This is really, it doesn't make me feel very comfortable. I want to make sure people want to actually to put up their hand. We'll take one more, and I can see that Hazel's also doing a great job capturing some of the ideas that come out there.
I could say something about our
Go
work.
for it, Valery.
So actually, to add to the child washing piece, because we actually saw the post-it and we kind of talked about it a bit, but some of the ideas is also about the child washing process doesn't necessarily have to happen at the end with the outcome or they're not listened to. It could also be a child washing experience if not the right appropriate methodology is being used to actually allow children to really participate. So if you're expecting 6-year-old to speak because you put a presentation up, is that really a process that allowed them to have their voice heard? Similarly, it could also be resonate for adult citizen assemblies that not everybody speaks in one way of presentation and PowerPoint and stuff, and perhaps we're citizen washing or we're people washing, but not allowing different methodology that actually enhances the process of getting people to speak up and have their opinion in ways that actually works for everyone. So and funding was also a big conversation as a barrier for us in our group, where we mentioned that citizen assemblies and different consultation, different ways of working with the voices of children and young people, because it is not seen as important as adults or as threatening to the political power, it doesn't necessarily come up as the priority. Therefore, there's also less funding available for these initiatives. So that was also one of the barriers mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Valery. And I'm just seeing, there's a couple of comments there in the chat pointing to other links. Thanks very much for that, David. And just to say, I really welcome, as we're kind of collating this guidance, we really welcome people getting in touch with links to other examples or tools that you found really useful in designing processes with children and young people. There will be a strong aspect of the guide that does kind of point you in the direction of other things that people have used. So do share that, as this is definitely a collaborative effort. And I also just want to, showcase all of the examples that are happening out there to show that there's also just no one right way. There's lots of right ways to do this. And I think as Niamh put earlier, the question now isn't should we do this, is how do we do this? It's now we're moving from the should children be involved to children that must be involved. And so how do we take this forward? I'm going to pass that to Graham now, but thank you so much for all of your contributions and just for being here today and engaging in this exciting conversation, and really look forward to staying in touch with you all in the weeks and months to come.
Thanks, Katie. I hope everyone agrees that that's been a really fantastic couple of hours. As Katie said, I'm not sure that we've really had any space like this to talk about engaging children and young people in assemblies, let alone climate assemblies. I'm thinking about citizens' assemblies more generally. So I'm really, it's really wonderful that we've been able to make this happen. I'd like to obviously thank Katie. I'd like to thank Oisín, Niamh, sorry, Martina, Valery, and our resident artist Hazel, and our colleagues at DBT who have pulled this all together. I think it's been a really great exercise, collective action, an example of collective action in practice. And again, thanks again, Katie, for doing that. And we're really looking forward to actually seeing the guidance. I think it will be absolutely fantastic. I just want to use this occasion just to advertise our next event, which will be an innovations market. And what that is, it's like an open space. We've got about 7 or 8 organisations who are going to be presenting innovations in practice in climate assemblies. And this ranges from Shipyard Foundation in Poland, the New Citizenship Project in the UK, Deliberativa in Spain, and there's going to be some stuff on facilitation, on using scenarios, on different methodologies for assemblies, and also some interesting developments in terms of impact on decision making. So all really relevant. It's not going to be as much fun as the last 2 hours, but it's going to be really relevant. So once again, look, thank you so much to the team who put this together and made it happen. Thank you in particular for the young people, children and young people who have given their time and their wisdom to us. And listen, this is clearly a new opening. I'm really looking forward to conversations between child activists, children and young people's activists, and child rights activists, sorry, and deliberative democracy activists. I think it's a really interesting coalition that could merge there. And I really think what Niamh said earlier, and I think it's been reinforced by others, actually having a child's right perspective and a child's empowerment perspective is absolutely critical to the work that we do together. So once again, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you at the next Knoca event, hopefully. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.